Lila had always lived a quiet life, one that went unnoticed by most people around her. She worked as a maid in one of the largest houses in the city, a mansion owned by a wealthy family who were known for their parties and taste for art. Every morning, she would arrive before sunrise, her small bag hanging loosely over her shoulder, her hair tied neatly and her eyes still carrying traces of sleep. She cleaned, dusted, polished, and arranged everything to perfection before the family even came downstairs for breakfast. The mansion was a beautiful place, filled with tall windows, grand chandeliers, and expensive paintings that lined every wall. But among all the luxury, the one thing that always caught Lila's attention was the piano in the main hall. It was a large black grand piano with polished ivory keys that shone under the warm lights. It stood in the center of the room like a silent secret, waiting for someone to bring it to life. Whenever Lila passed by it with a dusting cloth in her hand, she would pause for just a second to look at it. Sometimes, when no one was around, she would run her fingers lightly along the edge, feeling the smoothness of its surface. It wasn't just a piece of furniture to her. It was a reminder of something precious she had lost long ago. Lila had grown up in a small town with her mother, who was a street musician. Her mother used to play an old upright piano in the corner of their tiny living room. The piano was scratched and missing a few keys, but when her mother played, it felt like magic. The music filled their small home with warmth and hope. It made even the coldest winter nights feel comforting. Lila would sit beside her mother and listen for hours. Her mother always told her, "Music isn't about how perfect you play. It's about how honestly you feel." When Lila was only 10, her mother passed away after a long illness. The piano was sold to pay for hospital bills, and from that day, Lila stopped playing. She still remembered every note her mother had taught her, but life left her with no time, no instrument, and no reason to dream. Years later, when she found a job at the mansion, she thought it was fate that brought her back near a piano again. But it wasn't hers to touch. The family's daughter, Clara, took expensive lessons every week. Lila would sometimes hear her practicing while she worked in the next room. The sound was clean, structured, and technical, but it never carried the warmth her mother's music had. Still, Lila admired her talent quietly. She never thought anyone would ask her to play that grand piano. After all, she was just a maid. Her hands were used to scrubbing floors, not playing music. Every day at the mansion was predictable. She knew exactly what needed to be done, and when. There was comfort in the routine, cleaning the same rooms, arranging the same flowers, serving tea to the same guests. Yet deep inside, she always carried a soft ache, a longing for something more. Something beautiful that life had once given her but took away too soon. Sometimes, when the family went on vacation or left the house for a few days, Lila stayed behind to take care of things. On those rare, quiet afternoons, she would walk to the piano, sit down carefully, and press a single key. The sound would echo through the empty hall, making her heart tremble. Then, little by little, she would play the melodies her mother had taught her. She played softly, afraid that someone might hear, but in those moments she felt alive again. Her fingers remembered every note, every rhythm, every pause. It was as if the music was sleeping inside her all these years, waiting for her to wake it up. One day, as she played a gentle tune her mother loved, she didn't realize that someone was standing behind her. It was Clara's father, the owner of the mansion. He watched her silently for a few seconds, surprised to see the maid playing the piano. Lila froze when she noticed him. She immediately stood up, stammering apologies, saying she didn't mean any harm. He didn't say much. He just looked at her for a moment, then gave a short, dismissive smile. "Next time, stick to your chores," he said coldly, and walked away. That moment broke something inside her. From that day, she promised herself she would never touch the piano again. But fate had its own plans. A few weeks later, the family hosted a big party, one of those elegant gatherings where people dressed in fine clothes and spoke with perfect manners. Guests from all over the city arrived. The mansion glittered with lights and laughter. Music filled the hall as waiters served drinks and trays of food. Lila worked quietly in the background, making sure everything went smoothly. She wore her plain uniform, blending into the walls like she always did. As the evening went on, a small group of guests gathered near the piano. Someone mentioned that Clara was taking lessons from one of the best instructors in town. The proud father smiled and told everyone how talented his daughter was. One of the guests, perhaps after a few glasses of wine, laughed and said, "Why don't we hear a tune then? I'd love to see this piano put to use tonight." Clara hesitated. She wasn't used to performing in front of people without preparation. Seeing her discomfort, another guest jokingly said, "Maybe your maid could play us something simple while we wait." Everyone laughed. The suggestion was ridiculous. A maid playing the grand piano in front of a room full of elite guests? It was unthinkable. But the host, perhaps trying to be clever, looked toward Lila and said with a smirk, "Why not? Let's see if our hard-working girl knows how to play a note or two." The laughter grew louder. Lila's heart began to pound. She froze where she stood, clutching the tray in her hands. She didn't know what to say. Her instinct told her to refuse, to walk away quietly. But she also felt the sting of humiliation, the kind that comes from being treated as if your worth is nothing more than entertainment. I don't really," she began to say softly, but the host interrupted. "Oh, come now, just a simple tune, something easy. Let's see what you can do." The guests began to cheer playfully, waiting for her to step forward. Lila looked around. Every face in the room seemed to be watching her. Some were curious, some amused. None expected her to play well. Her hands were trembling as she slowly walked toward the piano. Each step felt heavier than the last. She could hear her heartbeat in her ears. When she finally reached the piano, she hesitated. The polished surface reflected her anxious face. For a moment, she thought about turning back, saying no. But then, deep inside her, a quiet voice whispered, her mother's voice. "Music isn't about how perfect you play. It's about how honestly you feel." She took a deep breath and sat down on the bench. The room went silent except for the faint clinking of glasses and the soft hum of people waiting. She looked down at the keys. Her fingers hovered above them, unsure where to begin. She pressed a single note. It echoed through the hall, then another. Slowly, she began to play a melody she hadn't played in years, the same tune her mother used to hum while cooking dinner. It was simple, warm, and full of emotion. At first, the guests exchanged amused glances. They thought it was just a poor maid trying to be brave. But as the music grew, something changed. The tone of her playing deepened. The rhythm became graceful, full of heart. Each note carried a piece of her story, her loneliness, her memories, her silent dreams. The laughter faded. Conversations stopped. All eyes turned toward her. Her hands moved effortlessly now, as if guided by something greater than herself. The melody danced around the hall, touching something inside every listener. It wasn't grand or showy, but it was real, deeply real. By the time she finished, the last note hung in the air like a whisper. The silence that followed was thick, almost sacred. For a few seconds, no one spoke. Then slowly, someone began to clap. Another followed. And soon, the entire room erupted in applause. Lila sat there, her heart racing, not sure how to react. She had played without thinking, without fear, as if she had been waiting for that moment her whole life. She looked up and saw faces that were no longer mocking her. They looked moved, surprised, even emotional. Some guests had tears in their eyes. Clara's father, who had laughed earlier, stood motionless, his expression unreadable. Lila rose from the bench quietly, her hands still shaking. She didn't know what to say. She simply bowed her head and whispered, "Thank you." In that instant, something shifted in the air, as if the entire house had witnessed a small miracle. What began as a joke turned into a moment no one would forget. And though Lila didn't realize it yet, this was only the beginning of a story that would change her life forever. That night, as she cleaned up after the guests had left, she walked past the piano once more. The room was empty, quiet again, but something inside her had awakened. For the first time in years, she felt proud, not because she impressed anyone, but because she found the courage to let her heart speak through music. She smiled softly, remembering her mother's words echoing in her mind. Music had once been her secret comfort, and now it had become her voice. And though no one knew what would come next, one thing was certain. The maid who once went unnoticed had played her way into every heart in that room. The night of the performance changed something deep inside Lila, though she didn't understand it right away. For the guests, it had been an evening surprise, a story to share at dinner tables about the maid who could play like a professional. But for Lila, it felt like the world had cracked open a door she thought would stay locked forever. When the applause faded that night and the guests went home, she returned to her small room behind the mansion with trembling hands. Her heart was still beating to the rhythm of the tune she had played. The silence of her room felt strange after so much noise, yet her mind kept replaying the melody over and over. She sat on the edge of her narrow bed, looking out through the small window. The moonlight fell softly across the room, and she whispered to herself, "Mama, I played again." Her voice was quiet, filled with disbelief and wonder. She thought of her mother's face, the way she used to smile whenever Lila played a wrong note and then fixed it on her own. Tonight, for the first time since her mother's death, she felt close to her again. But the next morning, things felt different. The usual calm of the mansion had a strange tension in the air. As she walked down the hallway carrying her cleaning cloths, she noticed two maids whispering near the staircase. They looked at her and smiled oddly before turning away. When she entered the main hall, she saw the piano again. The sunlight was glinting off its black surface, and for a brief second, she almost smiled, until she noticed Clara's father standing there with his morning coffee. He looked up at her. His expression was unreadable, somewhere between curiosity and irritation. "You surprised everyone last night," he said after a long pause. His tone wasn't warm. "I didn't expect that from you." Lila lowered her eyes and murmured, "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean to cause any trouble." He gave a small laugh that didn't sound kind. "Trouble? No. You entertained my guests. That was fine." He sipped his coffee and added, "But don't let it happen again without permission." She nodded quickly, her cheeks burning. "Yes, sir." When he walked away, Lila stood there for a moment, unsure whether to feel proud or ashamed. The applause from the night before had made her heart sore, but now it felt heavy again, as if she had done something wrong. That whole day, she kept her eyes down and moved quietly through her chores. Every time she passed the piano, she looked away. The music that had filled her with life only hours ago now seemed forbidden again. But what she didn't know was that not everyone in the house felt the same way. Later that afternoon, Clara came downstairs. She was around the same age as Lila, but had grown up in a completely different world. Private schools, expensive clothes, music teachers who charged more per hour than Lila earned in a week. Yet when she saw Lila cleaning near the piano, her face softened. "You play beautifully," Clara said softly, breaking the silence. Lila froze. She hadn't expected Clara to speak to her like that. "Thank you, miss," she replied, still focusing on the cloth in her hands. "My teacher always tells me to play with emotion," Clara continued, moving closer to the piano. "But I don't think I ever understood what that means. Last night when you played, I think I finally got it." Lila looked up, surprised by the honesty in her tone. "I just played what I remembered," she said quietly. Clara smiled faintly. "You played what you felt. That's different." For the first time, Lila saw a different side of her. Clara wasn't mocking her. She wasn't trying to show superiority. She was simply curious, maybe even a little inspired. "Do you still practice?" Clara asked. Lila shook her head. "No, miss, I haven't played properly in years. I just remembered a few things from before." Clara hesitated, then said, "If my father allows, maybe you could play again sometime. I'd like to listen." Lila's eyes widened. "I don't think he would like that." Clara gave a small, thoughtful smile. "Maybe not now, but maybe later." And with that, she walked away, leaving Lila with a small spark of hope that she didn't dare believe in. That night, as she finished her chores, she passed the piano again. The house was quiet. The family had gone to bed early. For a long moment, she just stood there staring at it. Her reflection looked back at her from the glossy surface, tired but alive. She ran her fingers lightly across the keys, not pressing, them just feeling the cool ivory beneath her fingertips. She whispered to herself, "Just one note," and pressed the middle key. The soft sound filled the air, gentle and warm. Then another note. Then another. She stopped after a few seconds, afraid someone might hear. But that single moment of sound brought her peace. She smiled faintly and whispered, "Tomorrow, maybe." Over the next few days, whispers about her performance spread among the staff. Some praised her, saying she had real talent. Others rolled their eyes, claiming she had just been lucky. Lila tried not to listen. She focused on her work, kept her head down, and moved quietly from room to room. But sometimes, when no one was watching, she found herself humming the same melody she played that night. It lived in her now. One afternoon, about a week later, the mansion hosted a smaller tea gathering, just a few close friends of the family. As usual, Lila helped in the kitchen and served the guests. The piano stood silent in the corner, almost like it was waiting for something. Among the guests was an older woman with sharp eyes and elegant clothes. She was known for organizing cultural events and music recitals in the city. As she sipped her tea, she said to Clara's father, "I heard you had an unexpected pianist last week, a maid, wasn't it?" The host laughed politely. "Ah, yes, that was quite a scene. My guests pushed her into playing, and surprisingly, she wasn't terrible." The woman smiled. "Not terrible? That's not what I heard. A friend of mine said she played with rare feeling, like she'd lived every note." He raised an eyebrow. "People exaggerate, I'm sure. It was amusing, but nothing special." Lila, who was standing nearby serving cups, felt her stomach twist. She lowered her head and pretended not to hear, but every word hit her like a small sting. The woman looked around. "Is she here? I'd like to see the girl who stirred such talk." Before Lila could slip away, the host gestured toward her. "There she is, and the pianist of the night," he said lightly. All eyes turned toward her. Lila froze again, the same way she had that evening. The woman studied her for a long moment, then said kindly, "You have a gift, my dear. You shouldn't hide it." Lila didn't know what to say. "Thank you, ma'am," she whispered. The host chuckled softly. "Gift or not, she has enough work to do around here." The woman gave him a look that suggested she didn't agree, but she said nothing more. That short exchange planted something new inside Lila. Not pride this time, but courage. Someone outside the mansion, someone who truly understood music, had seen her potential. It made her believe, even if just a little, that her music was real. That night, she took out a small notebook she kept hidden under her bed. Inside were scraps of paper filled with little melodies she'd written from memory over the years. She hadn't looked at them in a long time. Some were unfinished. Some were just a few lines of notes. She began humming softly, writing down the parts she remembered. She wanted to play them again, not for applause or attention, but because it made her feel alive. Days turned into weeks, and something started to change in the way she carried herself. Her steps felt lighter, her eyes brighter. Even the other staff noticed. The head maid once said teasingly, "Ever since that night, you've been glowing like you've got a secret." Lila only smiled and said nothing. Then one afternoon, Clara came rushing down the stairs holding a letter. "Lila," she called, waving the paper. "Remember the lady who came for tea that day? She's hosting a charity concert next month. She invited me to perform, and she asked if you could too." Lila's breath caught. "Me?" Clara nodded eagerly. "She said she was impressed by you. I told her you probably wouldn't agree, but she insisted. It's for charity. All kinds of musicians will be there. You don't need to be perfect, just play something heartfelt." Lila's hands trembled as she took the letter and read the neat handwriting. Her name was there, written clearly. She could hardly believe it. "I don't know," she whispered. "Your father would never allow it." Clara's smile faded a little. "Leave him to me. I'll talk to him." But Lila shook her head. You don't understand. People like me, we don't belong in those places. Clara placed a hand on her shoulder. You belonged at that piano the moment you touched it. You just don't see it yet. That night, Lila lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. Her heart was at war with her mind. Part of her longed to play again, to feel that spark of life that music always brought. But another part was filled with fear. Fear of being mocked, of stepping into a world that would never accept her. The next morning, when she saw Clara again, she said quietly, "Thank you for thinking of me, but I can't." Clara looked disappointed, but she nodded respectfully. "If you change your mind, the offer still stands." But fate was already moving faster than either of them knew. 2 days later, the elegant woman returned to the mansion, this time with a formal invitation in hand. She spoke directly to the host, praising his household for having such hidden talent. She insisted that the concert needed fresh, emotional performers, and that Lila's name had already been included on the list. The host was taken aback. He didn't like the idea of his maid performing publicly, but refusing would make him seem ungrateful or arrogant. After a long pause, he finally said, "If she wants to play, let her, but she still works here. This is no excuse for neglecting her duties." Lila overheard the conversation from the corner of the hall. Her chest tightened. The decision was made for her. That evening, as she stood before the piano once again, her reflection staring back, she whispered, "I guess I'll have to play again, Mama." And for the first time, she smiled without fear. Little did she know, the next time she would sit before that piano, her life, and her place in the world, would change forever. The day of the charity concert came faster than Lila had expected. For days she had been waking up before dawn and going to bed late, her mind filled with music. Even while scrubbing the floors or dusting the shelves, she found herself humming little melodies. It was strange but beautiful. She felt like her old self again, the girl who once sat beside her mother and played for the sheer joy of it. Still, fear clung to her like a shadow. She had never performed in front of strangers before, at least not in a place that mattered. The night she played in the mansion had been different, unexpected, unplanned. But now people were coming to watch, expecting something special. And that terrified her. The morning of the event, she stood in front of the small mirror in her room, staring at her reflection. Her uniform hung on the chair beside her, but today she wasn't going to wear it. Clara had left a soft cream-colored dress on her bed the night before, along with a note that read, "You deserve to feel like you belong." Lila touched the dress gently, afraid even to wrinkle it. It wasn't too fancy, but for her it was the most beautiful thing she had ever owned. She brushed her hair carefully, pinned it back, and slipped into the dress. When she looked in the mirror again, she barely recognized herself. For the first time in years, she saw not a maid, but a woman with dreams. When she walked into the main hall that morning, a few of the staff stopped and stared. One of the cooks even said softly, "You look different today." Lila smiled shyly and said, "It's just for tonight." Clara met her near the car, waiting outside. "You look lovely," she said warmly. "Are you nervous?" Lila laughed nervously. "I can't feel my hands." "Is that normal?" Clara grinned. "Completely." As they drove to the city's Grand Theater, Lila gazed out of the window. The streets were busy, filled with lights, sounds, and people. She hadn't been outside the mansion much since starting her job, and now she felt like a visitor in her own world. When they arrived, the building took her breath away. It was tall, shining with golden lights and filled with people dressed in elegant clothes. Musicians were tuning instruments, singers were rehearsing their notes, and stage managers rushed around giving instructions. Lila stood quietly in a corner, clutching her hands together. She had never seen anything like it. Everything looked so professional, so perfect. She began to feel small again. The elegant woman who had invited her spotted her from across the room and came over with a warm smile. "There you are. You made it." She placed a gentle hand on Lila's shoulder. "I'm so glad you agreed to perform. I've heard many pianists in my life, but there's something special about the way you play. It comes from the heart." Lila blushed and lowered her gaze. "Thank you, ma'am. I'll try my best." The woman smiled knowingly. "That's all you need to do." As the performances began, Lila waited backstage, listening to the others play. There were violinists, singers, and even a small orchestra. Their music filled the theater with grandeur and precision. Every note sounded polished and professional. And with each performance, Lila's confidence began to shrink a little more. She whispered to herself, "What if I make a mistake? What if they laugh?" Clara, who was waiting with her, noticed her shaking hands and said softly, "Remember what your mother taught you. Feel the music, don't fight it." Lila nodded, but her throat felt dry. Finally, her name was announced. And now, we welcome a very special performer. Someone whose story reminds us that talent can be found in the most unexpected places. Please welcome Lila. The audience clapped politely, unaware of who she really was. Lila stepped onto the stage, her heart pounding so loudly that she could barely hear anything else. The lights were bright, almost blinding. She could see rows and rows of faces watching her, curious, expectant, silent. She walked slowly to the piano, every step echoing on the wooden floor. When she sat down, her hands trembled so badly that she couldn't even place them properly on the keys. She closed her eyes for a moment and took a deep breath. The sounds of the audience faded. She remembered her mother's voice again, soft and reassuring. "When you play, don't think about who's listening. Think about what your heart wants to say." And just like that, the fear began to fade. She placed her fingers gently on the keys and began to play. The first few notes were delicate, almost hesitant. Then as the melody began to flow, something inside her broke open. The music filled the theater, soft at first, then deep and powerful. It wasn't just a song, it was her life in sound. Every joy, every sorrow, every lonely moment in that mansion poured out through her fingers. The audience grew still. The chatter that had filled the theater earlier disappeared completely. The notes rose and fell like waves, weaving stories of loss and love, hope and longing. Lila forgot about the lights, the crowd, the stage, and in everything. She was no longer in the theater. She was back in her small home as a child, sitting beside her mother. She could almost feel her mother's presence, hear her soft humming, see her smile. The melody changed, rising higher, more emotional. A tear rolled down her cheek, but she didn't stop. Her hands moved faster, each note carrying a piece of her soul, and when she finally reached the last chord, she pressed it gently, letting it linger in the air until it faded into silence. For a moment, there was nothing. No sound, no movement, just the echo of her music. Then the applause began. At first it was soft, a few hands clapping. Then louder. Then it spread like fire. People stood up, cheering, clapping, even shouting her name. Lila looked around in disbelief. The bright lights blurred with tears in her eyes. She placed a hand over her heart and smiled, overwhelmed. She had done it. She had truly done it. Backstage, the elegant woman rushed to her and hugged her tightly. "My dear, that was magnificent," she said with tears in her eyes. "Do you know what you just did? You moved every person in that room." Lila couldn't speak. She just smiled and nodded, still trembling. Clara hugged her too. "I told you," she whispered. "You belong here." After the show ended, many people came up to her. Some asked where she had trained. Others said her music made them cry. A few even wanted to interview her, but she was too shy, too overwhelmed to say much. On the ride back home, she sat quietly in the car, looking out of the window again. The city lights seemed brighter that night. The world didn't feel as cold or distant anymore. When they reached the mansion, she thanked Clara softly and went to her room. She changed out of the dress and sat on her bed, her heart still racing. It all felt like a dream. Later, she heard a knock on her door. When she opened it, Clara's father was standing there. For a moment, she froze, expecting another warning or lecture. But his expression was different this time. He looked thoughtful, almost proud. "I saw the video," he said quietly. "You were remarkable." Lila didn't know how to respond. "Thank you, sir." He nodded slowly. "I misjudged you. I thought that night at the party was just luck. But it wasn't. You have something rare and something even money can't buy." Lila looked at him, surprised. "I just play what I feel, sir." He gave a faint smile. "And that's why people listen." When he walked away, she closed the door gently and sat down, her eyes filling with tears again, but this time, they were tears of gratitude. The next morning, she woke to find the staff buzzing with excitement. Someone had posted a video of her performance online, and it was spreading everywhere. People were sharing it, calling her the maid with a golden touch. Musicians and journalists were talking about her, praising the emotion in her music. She didn't even know what to think. She hadn't played for fame or attention, only for her mother, for herself. Yet now the world was listening. That afternoon, the elegant woman called the mansion. She told Lila that several people wanted to invite her to perform again, not as a maid, but as an artist. Lila could hardly believe her ears. She went to the piano in the main hall, the same one she used to dust every morning, and sat down. The sunlight streamed in through the windows, falling across the keys. She pressed one note and smiled softly. For years she had felt invisible, just another worker in a big house, living quietly, unnoticed. But now everything was different, not because of fame or recognition, but because she had found her voice again. She thought of her mother and whispered, "I did it, Mama." Outside, the wind rustled through the garden trees, carrying the faint sound of music that seemed to linger in the air. From that day on, Lila's life began to change slowly. She still worked at the mansion, but now she had something more. She was invited to perform at small events, each time drawing people who wanted to see the woman who played from the heart. She stayed humble, still waking early, still helping where she could. But there was a new light in her, something no one could take away. Every evening, when the house grew quiet, she returned to the piano, the one that had changed her fate, and played softly, not for applause, not for the world, but for the memory of her mother and the little girl who never stopped dreaming. And though her journey was far from over, that night at the charity concert marked the true beginning of everything. The moment when a simple maid reminded everyone that brilliance doesn't wear fancy clothes or live in grand houses. Sometimes it hides in the hands of someone who never stopped believing in the quiet power of music and love. After the charity concert, life began to change for Lila in ways she had never imagined. She returned to the mansion, expecting to slip back into the quiet, unnoticed life she had always known. But something was different now. Every time she passed through the hallways, she noticed subtle glances from the staff. The housekeepers nodded politely, some smiled knowingly. Even the younger kitchen staff lingered a little longer, peeking curiously when she passed by. At first she felt uneasy. This attention was unfamiliar. Lila was used to being invisible, to fading into the background so that no one expected anything from her. But now, the moment she walked into a room, there was a quiet awareness. People whispered her name, not in gossip, but with admiration. The next day, the elegant woman who had invited her to the concert called again. This time she had concrete offers. Several music teachers and small concert organizers wanted to meet Lila. They wanted her to play at events not as a novelty, but as a true musician. They were offering scholarships, lessons, and opportunities she had never dreamed possible. Lila listened to the woman speak, her hands trembling slightly. She wanted to say yes, but a part of her hesitated. I don't know if I can," she said softly. The woman smiled kindly. "Lila, you have a gift. It belongs to the world, not just to the mansion. If you don't let people hear it, who will?" Those words lingered in Lila's mind long after the call ended. That evening, she sat at the piano in the main hall, the sunlight slipping across the polished keys. She pressed one note, then another, letting the music fill the silent room. She realized that she didn't just play for others, she played to feel alive, to connect with the memory of her mother, and now, perhaps, to touch the lives of people she would never meet. When Clara returned home from school, she found Lila at the piano again. Clara's eyes lit up. "You're practicing," she exclaimed. Lila laughed softly. "I suppose I am." "You must come with me to one of the lessons," Clara said eagerly. "You could learn so much, and it wouldn't hurt to have someone guide you for a while." Lila shook her head. "I've managed this long without anyone. Why start now?" Clara pressed her hand gently. "Because you deserve it. You've been hiding your light for too long." Her words made Lila pause. Maybe Clara was right. She had been hiding for years, letting life happen around her without stepping forward. Perhaps now was the time to take the first small step toward a life that felt bigger than her chores. Bigger than the mansion, bigger than herself. The following week, Lila met with the first music teacher, a kind older man with silver hair and gentle eyes. He didn't judge her for her lack of formal training. Instead, he listened as she played the melody her mother had taught her. Then he closed his eyes and nodded slowly. "Your mother must have been very proud," he said softly. "And so should you be. The way you feel music, it is rare. Most people who study for years never reach that depth of emotion." Lila felt a lump in her throat. Nobody had ever said anything like that to her. All her life she had been told to keep quiet, to work, to survive. Now someone was telling her that what she had always done in secret, in the quiet hours of her youth, was valuable, even remarkable. The teacher offered her a scholarship, saying that he would teach her for free, as long as she committed to practicing seriously. Lila hesitated for only a moment. The idea of learning, growing, and improving filled her with a mixture of excitement and fear. But when she thought of her mother, she knew she couldn't refuse. The first lessons were difficult. Her fingers were stiff, unpracticed in technical exercises and scales. She stumbled over notes, sometimes pressing the wrong keys entirely. But the teacher was patient, encouraging her at every turn. "Don't rush," he said. "Music isn't just about precision. It's about connection. Let your heart guide you." For the first time, Lila realized that she had been learning all these years without even knowing it. Her mother's lessons, her secret practice at the mansion, even the timid tunes she had played for herself, all of it had prepared her for this moment. Meanwhile, the video of her charity concert had gone viral in small music circles. Local newspapers and online blogs began writing about the maid who had played with the soul of a seasoned artist. People admired her humility as much as her talent. And slowly, the mansion's family began to see her in a new light as well. Clara's father, who had once dismissed her as just another servant, now observed her quietly as she worked. He noticed her concentration, her grace, and the way her eyes would light up when she spoke about music. He still expected her to complete her duties, but there was a hint of respect in the way he spoke to her now. He never admitted it openly, but he knew she was no ordinary maid. Even among the other staff, her presence began to change the atmosphere. The younger maids looked up to her, not only for her talent but for her quiet confidence. She didn't boast or demand attention. She simply worked, learned, and played. Her humility made her brilliance shine even brighter. As weeks passed, Lila's schedule grew busier. She balanced her work at the mansion with lessons and small performances. Each performance, no matter how tiny, gave her courage. She began to understand the power of her music, not just to entertain, but to connect with people, to make them feel something beyond words. One rainy afternoon, she received a letter from the elegant woman who had invited her to the charity concert. It was an invitation to perform at a larger event, a citywide music festival. This time, the audience would be thousands of people. The thought made her stomach turn. The pressure felt enormous. She went to Clara, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can do this. Thousands of people, it's too much." Clara smiled, gently holding her hand. "Lila, you've already touched hundreds with your music. Don't be afraid to let more hearts feel it. You're ready." Lila wanted to believe her, but doubt still clung to her. She thought of her mother, of the old upright piano in their tiny home, of the hours they had spent together. She remembered her mother saying, "Music isn't about fear, it's about courage." That night she practiced for hours, repeating her mother's melodies, letting the music pour out of her as if speaking words she couldn't say aloud. She cried, laughed, and sometimes sat in silence, listening to the echo of the notes. Each time she felt herself grow stronger, more certain that she belonged in this world of music. The day of the festival arrived, and Lila felt a mix of nerves and excitement unlike anything she had experienced. Clara accompanied her as always, holding her hand as they walked backstage. The theater was enormous, filled with towering lights, musicians tuning their instruments, and thousands of expectant faces in the audience. Backstage, she caught glimpses of other performers, professional pianists, violinists, singers, and orchestras. She felt small again, the familiar fear creeping in, but Clara squeezed her hand and whispered, "Remember your mother. Play with your heart, not your fear." Lila closed her eyes, and in that moment she was transported back to the small room of her childhood. Her mother's warm smile, her patient guidance, her soft humming, they surrounded her like a comforting blanket. When her name was announced, she walked onto the stage. The lights were blinding, but she didn't look at the crowd. She didn't think about who was watching or what they expected. She simply sat at the piano and let her fingers find the keys. The first note was soft, almost fragile. Then another, and soon a melody began to flow. It was delicate, powerful, and full of emotion. The audience fell silent. Each note carried a story of loss, hope, love, and perseverance. As she played, she could feel the hearts of the listeners connecting with her own. Some closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. Some held hands with loved ones, moved by the raw honesty of the sound. Lila was no longer afraid. She was free. When she reached the final chord, the silence hung in the air, heavy and reverent. Then the applause erupted, louder and more passionate than anything she had ever experienced. People cheered, whistled, and rose to their feet. Lila sat there for a moment, tears streaming down her face, her heart full. Backstage, the elegant woman hugged her tightly. "You did it," she whispered. "You showed the world what true music is." Clara hugged her too, whispering, "I told you, Lila, you were born for this." That night, when she returned to the mansion, Lila felt different. She was still a maid, still performing her daily duties, but something inside her had shifted. She understood now that her life could be bigger, brighter, and full of purpose. She had touched hearts with her music, and that could never be taken away. Even in the quiet moments when she sat alone at the piano, she realized that her talent was not just a gift, it was her voice, her story, and her connection to the memory of her mother. And now the world was listening. Her journey was far from over, but part 4 of her life had begun. She had crossed the line from hidden talent to recognized brilliance, and she knew, deep in her heart, that this was only the beginning of something extraordinary. After the music festival, Lila's life began to shift in ways she had never imagined. The recognition she had received that night was not just fleeting applause. It was the start of something much bigger. She returned to the mansion as usual, performing her duties quietly. But people's perception of her had changed. The staff treated her differently now, with respect and admiration, rather than the usual indifference or subtle judgment. Even Clara's father, who had once dismissed her as a mere servant, seemed to regard her with a mixture of pride and surprise. He didn't say much, but she noticed the occasional pause in his busy mornings when he watched her work. It was as if he had realized that she was not just capable of extraordinary music, but also possessed the quiet strength to carry herself with dignity. Despite the recognition, Lila struggled internally. Her days were filled with lessons, practice, and small performances arranged by the music teacher and the woman who had first invited her to the charity concert. But the nights were quiet, lonely, and full of doubt. She had spent most of her life hidden away, used to being unnoticed, and suddenly, the attention felt overwhelming. One evening, after returning from a small recital at a local school, she sat on her bed staring at the ceiling. Her fingers still tingled from the notes she had played, but her heart was heavy. "Am I ready for all this?" she whispered to herself. "What if I fail in front of everyone? What if I'm just lucky and they find out I'm not really talented?" Clara, noticing her unease, came into the room. She sat beside Lila and took her hand gently. "Lila, you're stronger than you think. Everyone sees your talent, but you need to see it too. You're not lucky. You've worked, practiced, and poured your heart into this. That's why it moves people." Lila nodded slowly, tears forming in her eyes. I'm scared, Clara. Scared of being exposed, of not living up to the expectations. Everyone is watching now." Clara smiled softly. "Then let them watch. Play for yourself first, and they will feel it. That's all that matters." The next morning, Lila went to her piano lesson with a sense of determination. She focused on refining the pieces she already knew, but her teacher encouraged her to try more challenging compositions. "You have an incredible gift," he said. "It's time to explore it fully. Don't limit yourself to what you already know." Lila hesitated at first. The complex pieces seemed impossible, almost frightening, but as her teacher guided her, breaking down the notes slowly, she realized that she could do it. The fear was still there, but it was accompanied by excitement, a thrill she hadn't felt in years. As the weeks passed, Lila's confidence grew. She began performing at more venues, local schools, small music festivals, and private gatherings. Each time she felt the same mix of nerves and exhilaration, but she also began to notice something new. The joy she felt while playing no longer depended on applause or recognition. She played because it was who she was, because music had become a part of her soul. News of her talent began to spread beyond her city. A local journalist wrote a feature about the maid who had captivated an audience with pure brilliance. Soon, Emails and letters arrived from music enthusiasts inviting her to perform in other towns. Lila was overwhelmed by the attention, but she also felt a sense of pride she had never known before. One afternoon, Clara came rushing into her room with a letter in hand. "It's from the festival organizers in the capital," she said excitedly. "They want you to perform at a major concert next month. This could be huge, Lila. People from all over the country will be there." Lila held the letter, her hands trembling. The thought of performing in front of such a large audience made her heart race. "I don't know if I can," she whispered. "It's too much. I've never played for so many people before." Clara squeezed her hand. "You can. You've come this far. Remember what your mother said. Play with your heart, not your fear." Lila took a deep breath and nodded. She knew Clara was right. Fear had always been part of her life, but she had learned to face it with courage. This was another step, another opportunity to let her music be heard. Over the next few weeks, Lila prepared tirelessly. She practiced for hours each day, perfecting her compositions and learning new pieces. She would sit at the piano late into the night, sometimes crying, sometimes laughing, as the music carried her through memories of her mother and the quiet moments of her childhood. The day of the concert arrived, and Lila felt the familiar mix of excitement and fear. The theater was massive, filled with rows of seats stretching far into the distance. She could see hundreds of faces looking up at the stage, waiting for her to perform. Backstage, she took a moment to close her eyes and breathe. She thought of all the times she had played in secret, the hours spent practicing alone, the nights spent dreaming of a life where her music mattered. All of it had led to this moment. When her name was announced, she walked onto the stage with her head held high, though her heart pounded in her chest. The bright lights shone down on her, but she didn't look at the audience. She focused on the piano, on the keys beneath her fingers, and on the music within her. The first notes were soft, almost hesitant, but as she played, the melody grew stronger. Her hands moved with grace and precision, each note carrying emotion and depth. The audience was silent, captivated by the beauty of her performance. As the music flowed, Lila felt herself transcend fear. She was no longer a maid, no longer a girl hiding in the shadows. She was a musician, a storyteller, a woman expressing her soul through sound. Each note told a story of loss, of hope, of perseverance. Each chord echoed the love her mother had given her and the strength she had discovered within herself. By the time she reached the final chord, the theater was filled with awe. The silence hung in the air for a moment, heavy with emotion, before erupting into thunderous applause. Lila's heart soared. She had done it, not just for the audience, but for herself. Backstage, the elegant woman and Clara were waiting, both with tears in their eyes. "You were incredible," Clara whispered, hugging her tightly. "You've touched so many lives tonight," the woman said, her voice trembling. "This is only the beginning. The world needs to hear your music." Lila smiled through her tears. She felt a sense of peace she had never known. For the first time in her life, she truly believed in herself. In the weeks that followed, Lila's life continued to change. She received invitations to perform at larger venues, even outside her country. Music teachers offered scholarships and opportunities for advanced study. People from all walks of life reached out, inspired by her story and her talent. Despite all the recognition, Lila remained humble. She continued working at the mansion, still performing her daily chores, but now with a sense of pride and purpose. She balanced her responsibilities with her growing music career, learning to navigate a world that was once completely foreign to her. Through it all, Clara remained her constant companion and supporter. She encouraged Lila to embrace her talent fully, to step into the world as a musician, not just as a maid who could play the piano. One evening, after returning from a successful performance at a local theater, Lila sat at the piano in the mansion's main hall. The sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the keys. She played softly, letting the music flow freely, feeling every note resonate within her. As she played, she thought of her mother, of the life she had once dreamed of, and of the courage it had taken to step into the light. She realized that her journey was more than just about music. It was about finding her voice, embracing her worth, and proving to herself that she could rise above fear and doubt. The next morning, as she prepared for another performance, Lila received a letter from a renowned music academy. They had seen her performances online and were offering her a scholarship to study formally. It was a chance to refine her skills, to learn from the best and to expand her horizons. She held the letter in her hands, her heart racing. This was the opportunity she had never dared to dream of, and now it was within her reach. She looked around the mansion, at the place where she had spent so many quiet years, and smiled. She knew that accepting this scholarship would change her life even more. But she also knew that she was ready. She had faced fear, embraced her talent, and discovered the strength within herself to pursue her dreams. With a deep breath, she whispered, "I can do this, Mama." And for the first time in her life, Lila felt truly free. Free to follow her music, free to embrace her potential, and free to step into a future that had once seemed impossible. The world was beginning to recognize her brilliance, but more importantly, she had recognized it in herself, and that was the greatest triumph of all. The evening of the concert was brighter than anything she had ever imagined. Rows of chairs were filled, lights softly glowing across the stage, and the gentle hum of the crowd filled the air. She stood behind the curtain, her fingers rubbing together nervously, a small smile flickering across her face as she peeked out. The sight of so many people waiting to listen made her heart race, but it also filled her with a quiet strength. It had been months since that first school recital. Life had changed in ways she never thought possible. Her story had reached people far beyond her small town. The video of her spontaneous performance had touched hearts around the world. Music teachers, strangers, even people who had never touched a piano before, had written messages about how her playing made them feel something. Deep inside, she read some of those words at night when she couldn't sleep, wondering how her little melody on an old piano could reach so far. Now, standing backstage at a large community concert, she thought about how everything began. She remembered her grandfather's old piano, how she used to press the worn keys even when half of them didn't work right. She remembered her parents watching her silently, not realizing how much music meant to her. And she remembered that first recital, the moment her fingers stopped following the notes on paper and started following her heart. That single moment had opened a door she didn't even know existed. A soft voice called her name, letting her know it was almost time. She took a deep breath. Her instructor from the academy gave her a reassuring nod from the side of the stage. "Just play the way you feel," he whispered. Those words echoed the same advice her first teacher once gave her, back when no one knew what she could do. The announcer's voice filled the hall, introducing her. The audience clapped politely as she walked out, her dress brushing softly against the wooden floor. She sat at the grand piano, its polished surface reflecting the warm light above. The air felt still, heavy with anticipation. She placed her fingers on the keys, closed her eyes, and for a moment she listened to the silence. She didn't plan to impress anyone tonight. She didn't even plan to play something grand. She only wanted to share something true, the way music had changed her life, the way it carried her through loneliness, and the way it connected her to others without a single word. Her first notes were soft, almost whisper-like. The melody flowed gently, as if she were telling a story through sound. Slowly the tune grew stronger, richer. Her hands moved with confidence and grace, her body swaying slightly as she played. Every note held a piece of her. The quiet girl who once sat in the back of the class, the child who played on a broken piano, the young woman who learned to believe in herself. The audience listened in complete silence. Some people leaned forward as if afraid to miss a single sound. The hall seemed to disappear. All that existed was her and the piano. She played not just with skill, but with emotion that poured straight from her soul. Halfway through, she paused for a breath, her fingers hovering above the keys. The silence that followed was so deep that even the smallest sound, a cough, a chair creak, would have felt loud. Then she began again, this time with a melody she had written herself, a piece born from the same night she first went viral. It was simple, heartfelt, and beautiful. She remembered the days when no one believed in her, when people thought she was too shy or too ordinary to stand out. But now, every note she played told them that quiet people could hold worlds of sound inside them. The room filled with warmth and emotion. It was as if her music painted colors no one could see but everyone could feel. As she reached the final part of her performance, her heart felt light. The music rose and fell like waves, soft at first, then powerful and full. Her fingers trembled slightly as she played the final chord, a sound that seemed to hang in the air long after it ended. She lifted her hands slowly from the keys, her head still bowed, her eyes closed. For a moment there was only silence. Then came the applause, not rushed or polite, but deep and thunderous. People stood, clapping and cheering, some even wiping tears from their faces. The lights reflected off smiling faces, and she could see her parents in the front row, holding hands tightly. Her mother's eyes were wet, her father's proud smile wide and unguarded. She stood up, bowed gently, and smiled. It wasn't the kind of smile that came from pride, but one of peace. She finally felt that what she carried inside her had reached others in the way she always hoped. Her heart beat fast, not from nerves, but from joy. After the show, people gathered to meet her. Strangers thanked her for her performance. A young boy with small hands told her he wanted to learn piano too. A woman said her music reminded her of her late husband and how it brought her comfort. Each word felt like a small miracle, proof that music really could touch people in ways nothing else could. Later that night, after everyone left and the lights dimmed, she returned to the empty stage. The piano sat quietly under the soft glow of the lamps. She placed her hand gently on the keys, feeling the cool smoothness beneath her fingers. The hall was empty now, but she could still feel the energy of the evening in the air. She pressed one note, just a single sound, and smiled at how it echoed softly like a promise. Life for her had changed, but she still felt like the same girl deep down. The one who loved the sound of old piano keys and believed that music was a friend that never left. The scholarship at the academy gave her new opportunities, but it was never about fame. It was about connection, that invisible thread between people who might never meet but could feel the same emotion through sound. In the weeks that followed, she was invited to play at small local events and teach children who wanted to start learning. She accepted happily, remembering how she began. She often told her students, "It's not about how perfect you play. It's about how honest you are when you play." And when they smiled nervously, she would tell them how she once played on a piano that missed a few keys, and how those small imperfections taught her to create beauty from what she had. She continued composing her own melodies, small tunes that told stories of everyday life, the sound of rain tapping on windows, a quiet afternoon by the lake, the feeling of walking home after a long day. Her songs didn't need to be complicated. They just needed to be real. Months later, she received a letter from a well-known music group inviting her to perform in a collaboration project for young talents. The thought made her nervous, but instead of fear, she felt excitement. It was another chance to share, to keep growing, and to keep her grandfather's old dream alive. The dream that music could speak to anyone, no matter who they were. On the morning of that new opportunity, she visited her old home. The broken piano still stood in the corner, covered in dust but full of memories. She sat on the same wooden stool she used to sit on as a little girl. Her fingers pressed the keys gently, and though the sound was off tune, it still made her smile. She whispered softly, "Thank you," as if speaking to her past self, the one who never gave up. Her journey had taught her that talent alone wasn't what made people great. It was the courage to express what was real inside, even when no one believed you. It was the quiet strength to keep going, even when life felt ordinary or small. The night of her next concert arrived not long after. The crowd was bigger, the stage grander, but her feelings were the same, that mix of nerves, love, and gratitude. When she sat down at the piano, she took a deep breath and thought of everyone who had supported her, from her teachers to her parents and all the people who sent kind words from afar. Then, once again, her fingers began to dance across the keys. The first note rang out and the hall fell silent. She played as if she were speaking directly to every heart in the room, as if saying, "This is who I am. This is my story." When she finished, she didn't need applause to know she had given everything. She simply looked up, smiled, and felt a wave of peace wash over her. Her journey had started with a simple tune, one that no one expected much from. But it turned into something far greater, a reminder that sometimes the smallest moments can reveal the biggest truths. And though her music had reached many places, she knew deep down that the real success wasn't in how many people heard her play. It was in how deeply she had learned to listen to herself. That night, as she walked off stage and looked back one last time at the piano, she whispered softly to the instrument that had changed her life, "You and I, we did it." And with that, she stepped into the light of her new beginning, her heart full of quiet brilliance that no spotlight could ever dim.